So do you want to give the background to why you built this framework?
Oh, sure. That might be a long story.
Tell it.
Okay, so
We got time.
I created this meme a while back. It's a ladder, and on one end, it's high prestige, but low information. On the other side of the ladder, the better side, it's low prestige, high Bitcoin information. And I think there are causal relationships between the two things on each end. So on the high prestige side, people with high prestige, I think they have trouble putting themselves in the shoes of people who are less well off. And also, they continue to associate Bitcoin with political views, the political views and behavior of certain kinds of Bitcoiners. And so it puts them off. So Bitcoin has a bit of a stink on it, honestly.
Is that the libertarian side?
Yeah, the anarchist, libertarian, FU sort of, Bitcoin side. I think of it as like the more like Ted Kaczynski side of Bitcoin. And then on the other end of the ladder, there's the low prestige, and that's because I think that there are two kinds of low prestige people that are interested in Bitcoin. One kind are the people who would just have never have an opportunity to get the prestige, So, and that's not a bad thing. Like prestige is a neutral, amoral thing. But they get Bitcoin a lot more quickly, and then they learn a lot more than the high prestige people do. And then, in addition, you have people who maybe once had prestige and they just don't care about it anymore, and that's one of the reasons why they're apt to get Bitcoin, and they're willing to give the prestige up for Bitcoin. And I'm closer to that camp. When I started writing about Bitcoin, like in 2018, I really didn't care so much whether that would burn some bridges. The reputational risk was worth it to me because I think Bitcoin's good. And so I wanted to write a piece where we could help the people on the high prestige side, low information side, help put them in the shoes of the people that are less well off. And then secondly, I've been increasingly inspired by the Cypherpunks in the 90s and what they went through. And I increasingly see, I just draw inspiration not only from what they did, but how they did it. And so this is the long. Okay, all right. So
it's a long form podcast. So
yeah. So
you make my job easier.
Okay. So let's start back in the 50s then. So Truman created the NSA, and it was a
who did?
Harry Truman.
Is that
president?
Is that why the Truman Show was called the Truman Show? Is that like an Easter egg?
That's a good question. I'm not sure.
Okay.
I'm not sure, but it was a secret organization. I mean, people didn't really know it existed 20 years. People called it the No Such Agency, but they finally came out of the woodwork when academic cryptographers started to publish research, especially on public key cryptography. So there's like Diffie-Hellman stuff. So initially, the way that the government would try to tamp down on cryptography, they would look for academics, and they'd say, like, you don't want to publish that. Okay? And in fact, don't. Come work for us. We'll use your academic research to actually make the country better and safer. And so a lot of people did that. And public key cryptography had already been invented by a British guy, James Ellis, years before. And so, but Diffie and Hellman, they kind of released this animal out into the wild, and it changed the world. And
Diffie's been on the show.
I have. I've listened to it. Yeah, it's great.
He's one of the most fascinating people I've interviewed.
What a legend.
I know, unbelievable. Sometimes you do an interview, you feel like, God, I am so lucky to be sat with you right now.
What's really interesting, so there's this book called Crypto by Stephen Levy. I don't know if you've read it.
No.
But it's interesting because it was published in 2001, and the author didn't have the benefit of Bitcoin, and so the way he writes about the cryptographers and the cypherpunks, it's like it's this pre-Bitcoin perspective that's so invaluable. So you get this perspective on these academics and activists that isn't tainted by the later price appreciation of Bitcoin and its success. But then the government, as the government was unable to just use this kind of soft coercion to prevent cryptography from being released out into the wild, and so they increasingly relied on more draconian measures. And by 91, there's this Senate bill called 266, and in the middle of the night, the head of the Senate Judiciary Committee changed the text in the bill. It sounds familiar. It's like all the same stuff that we're going through.
Exactly.
Changed the text in the bill so that like people who are producing communications protocols or equipment for communication protocols, they'd have to be able to offer the government the unencrypted like plain text on request. And what that means is that this isn't private at all, because the companies themselves would have to have a trapdoor, a backdoor. And so wait, guess who that was? The head of the Senate Judiciary Committee.
Tell me.
The gentleman from Delaware, President Joseph R. Biden.
I was about to say Biden.
Yeah,
I was like, who's old enough? Well, it's Trump, but he wasn't in politics. There's only Biden left.
Yeah, so is Biden. Probably good intentions, but enemy of the people at the same time. And he did it at the request of the FBI. So this is often how it happens. I think that politicians, like, they have good intentions, but they really don't know what they're doing. And soon after that, there was the Clipper chip, which gave the government the backdoor, which is even worse.
Yep.
And so how did the cypherpunks respond? Well, they responded by making memes. Honestly, they made stickers that said like "Big Brother" inside, like a riff on the Intel motto, Intel inside. They Phil Zimmerman rushed out PGP, pretty good privacy, like a private messaging protocol, and eventually John Gilmore made the Electronic Frontier Foundation. So they like made their own institutions. They memed, and they built. Really, I think we could boil down the response to two things: they built and they taught.
Cypherpunks write code.
Yeah, they write code and then they educate.
Yeah,
and they did that in response to this unrelenting government pressure to dampen the strength of cryptography. The government also tried to dampen the spread, so you can dampen the strength and also dampen the spread. So so you can either weaken cryptography or you can try to confine it. And so the way that the government tried to confine cryptography is via the International Arms and Trade Regulation Code, where the government sought to control the import and export of cryptographic or privacy devices. And so what this meant is that cryptography, like public key cryptography, counted as a kind of like war instrument. And so the cypherpunks, they did two things in response to this kind of attempt, which I really respect and I find kind of hilarious. One is that cypherpunk Phil Karn made the laws look silly. So there's this book called Applied Cryptography. It was published in 1994 by a guy named Bruce Schneier or something. Actually, he signed this anti-crypto letter. It's just like, why is your name on there? Well, anyway, this letter that was recently signed
Yeah.
also by people like Stephen Deal and Nicholas Weaver, like prominent no coiners. And
The 26.
yes, yeah, or 25 now.
25
Yeah.
now. Why? Who pulled out?
I think Kelsey Hightower might have pulled out,
Okay.
or so I'm told, in response to some persuasive argumentation by Alex Gladstein.
Okay.
Yeah, persuasive and diplomatic.
I think we can say it because it's going to happen soon. You can't tell anyone, but there is or you might even know that the cat,
Yeah.
So hopefully by the time this comes out, otherwise it have to be edited out. We're having the counter letter.
Yeah, there's going to be a very effective counter letter.
A reaction.
Yeah. And so what Phil Karn did is that he showed that the law forbade exporting the book in digital form because it had a bunch of cryptographic algorithms. So the law forbade the exporting the book to other countries in digital form, but he was allowed to ship it overseas in physical form. It's like, what gives, right?
Yeah.
And so with efforts like this, the Cypherpunks really, I think, captured the public imagination in order to show that some of these laws and some of the ways that government tries to impinge on our civil liberties, it's just silly. One of the other things that happened around this time is that the government, instead of just like banning the export of cryptography, they said, okay, you can, and they did this to like companies like Microsoft and Netscape. They said, okay, you can allow people overseas to use cryptography, but it has to be super weak. Okay. And so they allowed people to use like keys that consist of like 40 bits or something, which now it's trivial to break. Then it was less so, but still pretty trivial. And so,
so what's the fucking point?
Yeah, what's the point? and the Cypherpunks really did this neat thing. So Tim May emailed people on the mailing list and say, let's crack it. Okay, let's crack it and show people how silly this is. And then Adam back replied and said, I've already started. Okay, and so what they did is that they took the trillion or so possibilities and portioned it out so that people could search. Like it's like the digital version of in the physical world looking for a child. You portion up the space and say, okay, you search that way, I'll go this way. So that's what they did. It didn't work for Microsoft because it was like technical formality. But they not too long after, they shifted their attention to Netscape, and then they cracked it. The message they cracked was written by one Hal Finney. Okay. And so you see like a lot of these same people that were later involved with Bitcoin were involved in this thing. And think about what this is kind of an aside, but think about what they just did there. It was kind of group cryptanalysis. They together in a kind of decentralized network, by trial and error, tried to find a solution to a mathematical puzzle that is relatively hard to find but easy to verify. What does that sound like to you?
Repeat that last bit.
It's the puzzle.
Mining.
It's mining.
Yeah.
It's so you can't tell me that this kind of successful effort to embarrass the export law didn't have some sort of inspiration for Bitcoin mining.
Right.
One of the only differences is that they were trying to crack the private key, whereas in Bitcoin mining, you're trying to solve for like a hash.
Yeah.
And they're a little bit different. Hash is like a one-way mathematical Humpty Dumpty. So you're just trying to.
Yeah. No. Where my head is at, I'm getting lost thinking.
Yeah.
But so in this process, did they inadvertently discover some of the clues for creating Bitcoin?
I think so.
Yeah.
I think so. But in all of this, they were doing two things. They were building, and then they were teaching. And so the way that I draw inspiration from the way that they dealt with these kind of unrelenting attempts from the government to impinge on civil liberties is, I don't really have the skills to build, but I can teach, right?